Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Pretty good.
Great.
How are you doing?
Good. It's warm outside, which is why I'm wearing a tank top right now.
It is warm outside. Yes, you
I
pulled
think
some
it's in
weeds.
it's like 70 maybe. I don't know. I didn't check.
Mid 60s. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's supposed to
It
be
feels
70,
warmer.
I think, on Wednesday.
Nice.
Here, yeah.
Mm.
So we opened the windows, shut off the heat. Hopefully that'll be the last time we ever run heat.
Yeah, hopefully.
I don't
we'll
even
see.
know if it necessarily ran. I think I heard it like
maybe
really
once
early
or
in the
twice.
morning. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely exciting.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's President's Day. We're doing a recording in advance because next Sunday is Community Day, so we don't want to record on Sunday, and you are gone for most of the week. So.
Yeah, that would be an exhausting day.
Yeah, we're finding a nice balance here, and we're just going to do this chapter as well. But yeah, so we both had the day off, though we've both done a little bit of work, but I also took a nice half-hour nap. It was fantastic. And what else is going on?
I don't know.
Are you looking forward to going to Texas?
Yeah, you asked me about the weather, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I have not started planning that. I mean, I
Think
have
about
to check into the flight tomorrow, but I haven't started thinking about
Sure.
that. It's a relatively short trip, but
yeah,
it'll be. I don't know. The last time I saw my family, probably like almost a year, maybe, or a little less than that, maybe, because
in Tucson.
Yeah.
It was the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
May-ish, June, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Before we moved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean we're moving along pretty good here. We're like over 6 months living here.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Winston is totally settled in.
Yeah,
he loves his house now.
Yeah,
He's just at first he was, he had a couple of accidents and stuff. He was getting used to it, so we had to retrain him. Mm-hmm. And the way like our doggy door works here is a little bit different. And we weren't totally sure about like him near water. Would he be okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. But we're getting there.
He's fine. You're doing great.
Yeah, he's doing
puppy.
really good. I mean, he hasn't had an accident in probably over a month at least. Yeah.
Good puppy.
Yeah, he's a good boy.
All right. I'm ready.
Okay, well, let's do it.
I
figured we had less to talk about anyway because we did it yesterday. So, Juan's ready. All right. Turn to page 86, Gilderoy Lockhart. Today's lesson is called PR. The chapter begins with the first day of classes and on a sour note. At breakfast, Ron receives a howler from his mother, which chastises him in front of the whole school. Before Herbology, Lockhart pulls Harry aside and warns him against too much ego and attention grabbing, which Lockhart believes underlies the Whomping Willow incident. In Herbology, the class, the second years learn to replant baby mandrakes and avoid their dangerous crying. In Transfiguration, Harry has regressed to being unable to successfully change a beetle into a button. Before Defense Against the Dark Arts, Harry deals with Colin Creevey, a first year, wanting his photograph, and Lockhart believing he is witnessing more attention-seeking behavior from Harry. In class, Lockhart gives them a pop quiz about himself, which Hermione aces. He then releases an unruly band of pixies on the class as a hands-on experience. Hermione defends his lesson weakly, as Ron suggests Lockhart exaggerated or lied in his books.
Mm-hmm. Gilderoy Lockhart is up there with this in my notes. Is up there with Lucius Malfoy as one of my least favorite characters in the wizarding world.
Yeah.
I cannot with him.
Yes.
My goodness.
And Umbridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just horrible humans.
Yeah.
In different ways, but
yeah, very different ways. It's kind of shows again the breadth with which J.K. Rowling can write characters that we like and dislike, and that they are significantly different from each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah, one of the things that I wrote was so Lockhart is so self-absorbed and just he doesn't listen or pay attention. You may have encountered a human that's like Lockhart. I know I have. At least not at the extreme level, but like to some extent where like the person isn't listening to you. They're more obsessed with status or titles or bragging, talking highly about themselves as if it's like some game of like one-upsmanship. And it's just like
Sure, academia, Yeah, totally.
But I do think that it is interesting I was thinking about this as I was reading. It's interesting to read, this is in general, but to read characters through a perspective, and have characters who are similar to you as like normal, and characters who are different than you that are kind of like other. Because I was thinking about The Office, for example. So like Jim and Pam are kind of in the series positioned as like normal, or like us, like the viewers, because they always look to the camera like, can you imagine, or can you see and believe this ridiculous situation that's happening? Right. And I felt very similarly as I was reading this chapter with Lockhart, and then Harry just kind of being like, what is happening right now?
Yeah, you know, Lockhart will be interesting to track because like Umbridge and like some of the other characters that we dislike, they have some significant baggage, and their choice to not really, I don't know. Lockhart is really interesting to me. How he became who he is will be really kind of fascinating, but he is also good at it. I mean, he's good at the PR. Like, yes, it's students. For example, that picture at Flourish and Blotts was on the front page, I think he says, right? Is that true? You smiled?
No, I was just laughing to myself, or smiling to myself, because I was thinking about social media and influencers, digital media, and like, as someone who curates content, I produce content, but I also curate it to convey what the WizardPhD brand is. And so like the thought process is like very complicated. And like I've myself confronted like a lot of conflict in trying to portray that aspect of myself as authentically as possible, existing within platforms and systems that there are algorithms, there are ways to get attention. Attention is monetized. Like all of this like complicated, especially these like ethical questions of like, what is it that I'm doing with my life? So like, that's why I smiled, because I was thinking about that of like, yeah, you can be really good at it, but then like, I mean, what happens? Like is like, what happens to you as a person? Like at what point does this man believe that he is Gilderoy Lockhart in the way that this exists, rather than like, who are you really? Like that's kind of always the question that I have with Lockhart, is behind this facade, behind this presentation of who Gilderoy Lockhart is. It's a little like similar to this. It's great that it's a lot of parallels with him and Harry, or interactions with him and Harry, because Harry does have this like projected self that we've talked about before of like this other Harry Potter, but he doesn't want that. He doesn't embrace that. He doesn't lean into it where he's playing it up. Yeah, except in the movie. That's a funny line. But it's really interesting to have those two, especially because Gilderoy Lockhart is a grown man and Harry's like a 12-year-old kid.
Yeah, and it's fun to me to juxtapose like Lockhart, like you're saying, just kind of steamrolling over Harry, as opposed to like McGonagall and Dumbledore being like, explain yourself, and listening to the entirety of the story.
Yes.
And truly like that actually the story itself was important. It wasn't any, I mean, Lockhart is so self-absorbed that he doesn't even care. It's irrelevant to him. Like, I do think it's a little interesting to me that Lockhart pulls Harry aside sometimes. It's not like he doesn't necessarily do everything publicly, like he pulls, but that's like more of a protege, or like the way he views, I don't know, it might even be like more sinister of like trying to build a relationship and almost like a Slughorn style collecting Lockhart, collecting Harry to be like somehow helping his PR.
Yeah, I feel like it's extremely manipulative.
I taught Harry Potter, you know.
So manipulative, and it's kind of like I don't know. Lockhart is I wrote a lot about Lockhart. So from Wizarding World, there is writing by J.K. Rowling. You asked before what house he was sorted into, and one of our viewers, Beetle D. Bard, commented he's in Ravenclaw house. So Lockhart was sorted into Ravenclaw, soon achieving good marks in his schoolwork, but there was always a kink in his nature that made him increasingly unsatisfied. If he was not first and best, he would rather not participate at all. Increasingly, he directed his talents towards shortcuts and dodges. He valued learning not for its own sake, but for the attention it brought him. He craved prizes and rewards. He lobbied the headmaster to start a school newsletter because he liked nothing better than to see his name and photograph in print. So it's kind of interesting because, like, I'm reading this and I'm like, this dude's super ambitious, like Slytherin style, cunning, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's like super interesting because
Slytherin rising for sure.
Yeah. It's really interesting because, again, like going back to present day with social media and the way that those dynamics exist within social media. Sometimes like it's this ever lasting grind of trying to be the best, because you have constantly metrics and data and analytics always in your face. Even if you don't have necessarily a following of people, it's just you and your private account, you can access your analytics. You can see like how many people like your things, how many people comment, or when people view things. And it's really ridiculous how much of that is part of I'm reading a lot of stuff, academic stuff about like technology and like actual debates I have in my classes that I teach of like, what is it? It's not good enough or satisfying to just say like, oh, digital technology is good or it's bad or social media is toxic, like flat, very definitive statements. That's not interesting. The more interesting piece is the nuanced conversations about like, well, what is it that we're doing with it and how is it collectively or culturally that we're having conversations about how we exist in these spaces. Like, yeah, things were, you could imagine things were simpler or people could have more face-to-face conversations prior to the internet, but people were still terrible to each other. You know, we still had these muggle problems that existed, and this is just another tool that facilitates that. And in a lot of the stuff I'm reading, it also transforms, it shapes how we act and interact. So it's not as simple as like you enter technology into a society and then it does these things. It also shapes like how we think, how we like calculate in the ways that we interact.
PR.
So it's like really fascinating. PR.
Yeah.
Yes.
My favorite quote was, and this is Lockhart speaking, and 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. But I don't talk about that. I didn't get rid of the band and banshee by smiling at her. He waited for them to laugh. A few people smiled weakly.
Well, it's funny because he mentions that multiple times.
Yeah, in this, yeah. Well, yeah. Just to go back for 1 second.
Yeah.
I think it's actually really useful to recognize that he's a Ravenclaw in order to expand on the conversation about Slytherins. Because actually, do we also find out in our research, I think that Umbridge was not Slytherin.
No,
right?
she was.
She was Slytherin.
Yes.
Well, regardless.
Yeah, Quirrell and so far Quirrell and Lockhart are Ravenclaw.
Too. Okay. It's really useful to see when we get to it, when we really get down to it, like Lockhart is one of the most evil characters in the whole series. I mean, the way it's so sinister, it's so dark what he does, and he does it, and he takes it so lightly. Yeah. That like it's all this part of this PR game. I mean, it's definitely to me it's useful to recognize like it's not a Slytherin. So like you got to be careful with your biases against Slytherins and like your kind of non-biases against like non-Slytherins. But also just like recognizing not all people who are evil choose to be evil in the same way or enact that the dark parts of themselves in the same way, that it's like he's not overt. I mean, he is kind of like Lucius, I guess, in some ways. Like Lucius has a PR firm himself of like being able to cover up for past deeds and saying he was imperious and all this stuff, and how he can get away with that and how Lockhart can get away with all this. I mean, like Albus Dumbledore hired Gilderoy Lockhart. Yeah. I don't believe he would have hired him if he knew exactly how dangerous Lockhart actually was, like maybe he thought it was just fictions. I think that this will be an important part of the conversation on Lockhart, is that people like Ron, for instance, might just think he's lying, but it's darker than that when we get to it.
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't include all the excerpts from this Wizarding World article, but even his teachers at Hogwarts were annoyed with Lockhart. So they like saw through his stuff
his
and
do we know?
Oh, sorry,
Unknown.
You're asking me questions that I did not.
No, I was just curious.
Get the details on.
If it had list.
But okay, I mean, we'll get to it in the book of Dumbledore's explanation for why he hired Lockhart. But so one thing that I really dislike about the whole Lockhart situation in this book is how it seems that all the women and girls are just like in love with him, and from right here, like the only two people that I've seen super critical are Harry and Ron, because we're viewing this from Harry's perspective, and like
we also got Sprout being annoyed.
Yeah, it is different because she's a school teacher. I mean, yeah, she's the teacher. It's not like, you know, all the moms and like Hermione Granger, who is like a brilliant witch. Like, I can't buy that she like can't see through something that, to me, maybe not necessarily like, oh, he's a fraud, but at least can't you see how self-absorbed this man is? Like, he just cares about himself. And like, for someone like Hermione, who in my opinion, like we've seen, like she's highly sensitive. Like, yeah, she's like very brilliant and in her studies,
shrewd
but
too, right? Like she would see through something like that.
Yeah, like I don't.
Quickly.
Yeah, so that's like one issue I have with it.
I suspect that it might have even played out differently if some of the interaction was with Harry instead of Ron. Like there's a relationship between Ron and Hermione that is tricky, where like Hermione, I think in this moment at least, feels defensive. Like I feel like she already, through this class, she has already recognized that Lockhart is a fraud, obviously, but she's like protecting herself because like Ron saw the hearts or whatever around Lockhart's name and like needled her for it, and she like got embarrassed and pulled away her schedule from him, and then like Ron is the one that's like always lying or whatever.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like, so my quote was the last exchange where Harry's like, Hermione, he didn't have a clue what he was doing. Mm-hmm. She says, rubbish, you've read his books. Look at all those amazing things he's done. Like, the closest friends that she has at Hogwarts, like, I would expect her to at least reveal something to them. Like, there's no reason for her. I mean, maybe because of Ron, like, that's a good point. But I don't know. Like, that whole exchange just made me think about that. And then in general, like, again, everyone knows now at this point I hate Lockhart, but in the wise words of Kendrick Lamar, sit down, be humble. Like, even if it were true that Lockhart has done all these things, has had all of these adventures, and was able to do all these things, like, do you need to brag about it? Do you need to broadcast to the world how wonderful you are? Like, this is, to me, like, this is very personal to me, of like how I feel about contributing to the world, to a society. And so thinking about, and it's very complicated because of course you would want to, or people would want to feel recognized for things that they do. Otherwise, it kind of feels like people are taking advantage of you. Like, that might be one dynamic, but like our entire society, we have so many awards and accolades, and we're competing against each other and having things of like the best of the best, and like lists like 30 under 30, or like all sorts of things where these structures or these awards or these ways that we interact are meant to literally put people on top of other people, like to communicate some message. It's not necessarily like explicitly in the award, but it's implied, like, look how great this person is, or whatever. And the older I get, the more that I'm just kind of like over it. Like, I'm not impressed. I'm just kind of like, just do good things, and I don't know, sit down. That's kind of like why he bothers me so much. Oh my gosh, I feel like we've been talking about it forever. It can be contrasted
pretty heavily with Dumbledore in that way, where Dumbledore's almost secretive about the events that, like, that he's done. I think it'll be interesting as the Fantastic Beasts keep rolling out to maybe see more of like Dumbledore's relationship with the wider wizarding world.
Yeah.
And like, how do they know how powerful he is already? Right? They're like already seeking him out, but he hasn't had his duel with Grindelwald yet. So is it all reputation from his Hogwarts learning, like becoming a professor? It's kind of interesting that way.
We do know from the Chocolate Frog card that he worked with Flamel and created the Philosopher's Stone. And like at that point,
No, I
right?
don't think so. No.
On the Chocolate
Flamel
Frog
had already made the Philosopher's Stone long before Dumbledore was alive.
Oh, I thought that was in the card.
They did the dragon, 12 uses of dragons.
No, Dumbledore did.
With Flamel, I think. Or something like that. Yeah.
But
it wasn't the Philosopher's Stone.
I remember it being something like at least working with him. So Dumbledore is part of the Order of Merlin First Class, which is awarded for acts of outstanding bravery or distinction in magic.
Because Lockhart is third class?
He's third class. Second class is awarded for achievement or endeavor beyond the ordinary, which when I looked through wiki entries, the only known person that we have, or at least on this wiki entry, is Mr. Newt Scamander for his work with Fantastic Beasts. And third class is given to those who have made a contribution to our store of knowledge or entertainment, which... He probably got it for like knowledge, but like for sure entertainment, fine. But yeah, the Order of Merlin is an award that has been given out since the 15th century, commemorating Merlin, of course, himself. And the first order award, so all of the awards are gold, but there's like different ribbon. And so the first class is a green ribbon as a nod to his Slytherin class. Purple ribbon for second class and white ribbon for third class. That's also from Wizarding World writing.
Here's a turn. That's amazing, by the way. I noticed that he was third class, but I didn't actually think about looking up whether they were actually well defined or if it was just like a ranking or something. I would love to hear your thoughts actually on just from like a funny you're a teacher perspective, Lockhart releasing the pixies. That is I've always had this dilemma of like, there's an uncontrolled nature to it, and it's somewhat destructive of the room, but there's a place for that type of pedagogy that I actually think like J.K. Rowling isn't really nodding to here, which is like a problem solving, figure it out type thing.
And I would agree with you, except Lockhart's not an educator.
Yeah. No, I know, but I just think it's interesting.
Like he's literally just okay, so in my opinion, the way Lockhart is portrayed is a lot of stereotypical negative perceptions of what teachers do, of like you just kind of go into a classroom, you just wing it, and you throw people in situations, you like talk at them, whatever, no care or attention or thoughtfulness, which is the entire opposite of like what I teach and like other teacher educators teach in programs, of trying to think about interactions between humans and like instructional design and like, I don't know, sorts of activities that would warrant people interacting in a classroom together.
This is exactly my thinking. Exactly.
What?
And I think that's
what
really
I just said.
useful. Yeah, because in other circumstances, and I think we'll see this with Professor Lupin, there are certain pedagogical things that Lockhart could have done to make releasing pixies just like day one activity, released pixies, like figure it out, actually quite an impressive learning experience. But the casual way with which he does it, the sort of thoughtless way that he does this,
like, what's your
it's
plan,
really
dude?
interesting because I agree. It's like it's very interesting to me that like as teacher educators, like thinking about, it's not just the idea of releasing pixies that is just blanket bad. It's that Lockhart is doing it with like no structure, no sort of scaffolding of like what's going on. They didn't learn a spell beforehand that might be effective. They took a 30-minute quiz on Lockhart.
Yeah.
Right? So
that's where
it's just
the
interesting
assessment does not align with
right.
the activities.
Because then like Lupin will come along and they'll do the Bogart cabinet, but they learn the spell, right? Like there's this simple tweak to a structure of a classroom that like really can make or break.
And so the thing, well, I haven't gotten into it this semester, but I do lesson planning. And so the thing is like not necessarily that you create some sort of like airtight, foolproof lesson plan, because that's not how the real world works. Like you can't control humans. Like that's like the fundamental thing of like, if you learn anything from me, it's you can't control humans.
Yeah.
Don't try.
Yeah.
So what is it that you can provide as someone who's like facilitating a classroom experience? And so like, yeah, you can, there needs to be both. Like you need to think carefully about what it is that you're going to do. And you need to be able to adapt or improv or whatever, like react to what is happening. And like, that was clearly not there.
Would you say it's almost like dungeon mastering for D&D?
Probably. I've never dungeon mastered, but
in my dissertation.
Then you would probably say so, right?
Yeah, like talking about how dungeon mastering is, in a lot of ways, a balance between you have to be able to improv.
Yeah.
And you also have to be able to plan. And you have to be able to weave those two things together. Now, my strength would be improv over planning. Takes a lot more time. But it's very interesting to me, like that is what teaching is like.
Yeah.
Like you have goals. You have known methods of how to achieve those goals.
Yeah.
They're not going to work 100% of the time for 100% of the people.
Right.
So you have to react. You know, how are you going to tailor what you're doing to who is in the room, because they're not interchangeable, right?
Yeah.
This is what college teaching, and especially college math, I think suffers from the most. But that I was just curious what.
But even contrast to like so thinking about like instructional design at Hogwarts, we haven't really seen much of like what happens in classrooms. We see like little flashes and glimpses. But even in this chapter, we have Sprout with the mandrakes, and like, oh, what do we find out about mandrakes? Oh, like if you hear their scream, it's deadly.
Might kill you.
So there was that point, but then the other point, there's this cute little nod. Well, I don't know if it's cute, but like a nod to the venomous tentacula.
Yeah.
And she said, "Be careful of it because it's teething." And like, I just did the McGonagall video. Her husband died from a venomous tentacula bite. And so it just made me laugh. No, this was, what's his name?
No,
Elphinstone, the guy she eventually ended up marrying, but then he died.
Right.
Well, I mean, first Dougal died, and then he died from the bite. And then she was just like, all right, I'm just going to be a teacher at Hogwarts and just throw myself into the work.
We also see a bit of McGonagall's class, too, with the beetles and buttons.
Right.
That's also interesting. I agree. We don't get it, and probably rightfully so, though I could see a spin-off of like a class where you're the teacher or whatever, following the teacher and what they do in Hogwarts. Yeah. But like her and Flitwick tend to have similar types of lessons when we see them. It's like students practicing a certain technique. But it's not abstracted in the way that like Umbridge will do it later, where it's like no wands, you just think about it, right? You just like think about it. You have to actually like do something. Yeah.
Speaking of the baby mandrakes, so this is another real thing.
Mandragora. Yeah.
So we hear from her. Hermione just knows everything. She's at the end of this chapter, she has earned at least, because we don't know what else she did during the day, but at least 30 points for Gryffindor.
I laughed at that. There's point bloat here in year 2. She's earning 10 points, and it's like, what?
Oh my gosh. So mandrakes are used to return people who have been transfigured or cursed to their original state, like the state of being. And so I wrote in my notes, you should use the mandrake on the Slytherin girl in Wizards Unite, where she's turning into a ferret. But also IRL, in real life, mandrakes are hallucinogenic and also can be used for anesthetic purposes. So, because it's a narcotic. Right. And the roots themselves often resemble human faces. So like because it's a hallucinogenic and like the roots kind of look like a face, it's often tied to like magical practices or like superstitious things. And has been used in the past to relieve rheumatic pains. What else? In the past, mandrakes were made into amulets, which were to believe to bring good fortune. However, one of the superstitions is that when a person who pulls it up would be condemned to hell. So the saying, or like the thing to get around it, was people would tie animals, like a dog or something, like some sort of animal, to the root, run off and make the animal chase after it so that the animal would pull out the root. Like, I mean, so sometimes I'm like, humans are like so cool. And then I read stuff like this and I'm like, humans are so dumb. Come on.
What are we doing now that people in 300 years are going to be like, are you joking
like,
me?
Why did you do this?
Why did you have your dog pull up your mandrake? Because you thought you'd be cursed. Yeah, no.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were several moments. Oh yeah, because going back to Lockhart, when you mentioned like him talking to Harry, and he's like, I'm gonna read this full thing because I wrote it down. A few people have heard of you, haven't they? All that business with he who must not be named. I know. It's not quite as good as winning Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award 5 times in a row as I have. But it's a start, Harry. It's a start. And I just wrote in my notes, like, adults are so strange. Like, that's all that is crossing my mind. Like, Harry is just so normal. Like, if we're taking like our perspective taking as normal, like the lens through which we see the world as normal, and then we have this Lockhart dude that's just like, oh, you defeated Voldemort? Cool. I smiled a bunch of times and got some award in a magazine.
Yeah.
It's just
Lockhart is a lot to handle.
Too much. Oh, going back to the beginning though, so we didn't talk about the howler. So Neville, we get reintroduced to all the characters again. So Neville, I don't remember this from the first book, but the way that he's described is that he was a round-faced and accident-prone boy with the worst memory of anyone Harry had ever met, which I guess like ties back to the Remember All, but like I guess I didn't really.
I'm forgetting the password.
Oh yeah, I don't think that I would describe Neville like that way, but accident prone probably. Sure. And so Neville says, mail's due any minute. I think Gran's sending me a few things I forgot. And I was like, dude, why didn't the Weasleys just send the broomstick, the diary, and it was fireworks? Probably cost money. Like, yeah, and that was my next thought. It was like, I wonder how expensive it is to like mail
Wizard
packages.
Shipping.
Yeah.
Amazon.
And their poor Al on the last limb.
Oh,
bringing the howler, which poor Ron got totally embarrassed.
That's part of why I was thinking about PR, because there's a lot of things happening that aren't what they seem, but people from the outside are watching it. And like Justin Finch-Fletchley is introduced in this chapter and all that sort of stuff.
We are
introduced. Know if I remembered his name exactly.
Yes. We are introduced to 2 Muggle-born students.
Colin.
Which I think is interesting because our next chapter, is it the next chapter that's Mudblood?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So we are getting into, we have had hints throughout the chapters. There's stuff with blood that is in the wizarding world, and it's going to become very important in this story. But we have 2 Muggle-born wizards, Justin Finch-Fletchley, like you mentioned. His only quote, and I don't really remember this, like I know who he is, but I don't remember this like exchange that clearly, but he says, my name was down for Eden, and says that his mother was slightly disappointed when he decided to go to Hogwarts. I think she's begun to see how useful it'll be to have a fully trained wizard in the family. So here I'm reading this and I'm like,
doesn't
wait,
she
what?
think that because he showed her Lockhart's books, right?
Yes, yeah. So he's a Muggle-born wizard, and from the stuff I could find on him online, it's speculated that he might be from an upper-class family because
Eton is famous.
It's famous. Yeah. It's this school, all-boys school that apparently have famous alumni, like members of the royal family and prime ministers of Britain. So like it's one of those like namey things. And also apparently like double-barreled surnames had I don't think they do as much anymore, but have some sort of connotation of like wealth for some reason. I don't know. But I found that interesting.
See.
And then Colin Creevey, which, oh my gosh, so when I know who he is, and I knew that I was going to be sad when I looked up his like entries online, but we'll get to that way later. But he's just so sweet. So we meet him. His dad's a milkman. He's Muggle-born, and he's taking photographs everywhere. He's just like photographing everything. He's just so pure and excited, and just like wants to send photos back to his dad, and it's just so sweet. Just so sweet.
No, it really is. Yeah. It's amazing to me, like, how she can write somebody like Colin Creevey as well, because he is so sweet, but he also like kind of annoys Harry. There's this funny balance to it all, you know. It really is. Like, it's like, oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, part of it is like he's kind of setting off Harry on like one of the things that he doesn't like, which is,
and then Lockhart is
and then Lockhart just builds off of it.
Damn it, Lockhart.
What are you doing? My goodness. Yeah.
Hermione aces the quiz.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I think Super Carlin Brothers did one of their like regular Pottermore quizzes, and the thumbnail was like, "What is his favorite color?" Like referring to Lockhart. And I always think that it's like turquoise or like some sort of blue, but it's not. It's
I didn't even pay attention.
Like lilac or something. It was like a purplish color.
Didn't commit it to memory. Never will.
Yeah. I mean, of course, Hermione would get every single one right. Not necessarily because she's like obsessed with him, but because she's Hermione. Like,
yeah,
she was reading the Voyages with Vampires at breakfast. Like, there are 7 books. You guarantee that Miss Hermione Granger was reading them before school started.
100%, yes.
And then one last thing that I wrote down was Ron patched up his wand with Spello tape.
Yes.
Where Spello tape is actually a play on an actual brand called Cellotape, which is apparently popular in the UK for any of our...
I've heard of it.
Oh, you have?
Yes,
I have not. Okay. So a leading brand in the UK, generally used for joining, sealing, attaching, and mending, which makes sense. And it's used generically, kind of commonly in the United States. If we talk about Scotch tape, it's used commonly as a household name. But I was also like, dudes, like everyone. So McGonagall's getting annoyed at Ron for like, blowing smoke or like not being able to use his wand. And it's like, fix his wand if you're so mad about it. Like, come on, people. And poor Harry, he's like trying to offer a solution, and Ron's just like, oh, I don't want to like say like my wand's broken and get another howler, and it's just poor Ron. This is like Ron. I can't even start with
Classic Ron.
Yeah, exactly.
Just gonna deal with that. It's like me. That's such a me thing to do. It's like, no, I can't.
Tape it up.
I don't want to deal with this bit. Like at its core, I'll just like try to save it, even though I know I can't.
It's broken.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like smoking and stuff. That's crazy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It was a crazy chapter. My God.
Yeah.
So much happens. First day of school,
Yep. First day of school.
All that madness.
My goodness.
Malfoy. We didn't even talk about Malfoy being
himself. Yeah. I skipped over that. I mean, I didn't write it down in my notes because I was just like,
enough
I roll
Malfoy.
Again.
Yeah, we're going to be seeing a lot of him pretty soon anyway. Yeah. Cool. Anything else?
No, that's all that I have. Yeah.
That was a lot. So
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, until next time, wands ready.